So welcome to another war game review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at a game called Saigon 75 from Nuts Publishing. Now, if you're having some deja vu, that is because you have been with us for a very long time, and we appreciate that very much. We played a prototype copy of this game in 2018.
5 years ago.
Yes.
5 years.
And
5.
for a game to be in a prototype stage and to be sent to reviewers to kind of drum up some interest from a pre-production copy, ready for like a crowdfunding or something like that.
Yeah, this was a Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, it has to be pretty far along the design process, the design and development process. So 5 years later, here we are with the finished copy.
Yeah.
And this game is quite different from what we...
Is it quite different? I disagree with that statement.
Yes. I also
Slightly.
disagree with that statement.
I'm not sure it's totally different. I think there are some nuanced changes.
Yes.
I do not remember the objective markers.
No.
And those are new. Probably a balancing element.
And perhaps we would have been well served going back and watching that, which I had thought about doing and then didn't.
Go back and watch it and tell us how it's changed.
Yes.
Thank you.
But there were some points in this game where it was like, oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Or I remember the feeling of that. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of similarities in the type of thing that happens in this game.
Yeah.
So this is Saigon 75. It's a two-player, kind of a grand strategic, late-stage Vietnam War game.
And it is an area control game.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately what the NVA are trying to do is control territories.
Yes.
To drive the ARVN, or SV, South Vietnamese, to desert, right? The more territories you have as the NVA, the more desertions are going to happen, and ultimately that leads to there being no yellow units on
either
the board.
there's no units or it's then much easier to take Saigon, also win condition. So this is, it's lots of dudes that, these little octagonal cylinders, lots of different colors, especially for the SV player who has a lot of different types of units, a couple of different types for the North Vietnamese player. But basically, there's not a ton of spaces on the board. There's a few spaces on the board, and it takes an hour, right?
Yep.
There's 16 cards in a session, and you're going to play 8 apiece, and you're going to activate a bunch of guys, move them, and attack with them, and play a card that's going to do something cool, depending on which side you're on. And you're going to do that 8 times each, and then you're going to assess victory if it hasn't already happened automatically. So it's not a long game. It's a short game. It's not a complicated game either. Pretty easy rulebook, and it's a game that can feel one-sided at times from the North Vietnamese standpoint, because again, this is the very last days of the South Vietnamese, the ARVN regime, where this is just the NVA going all the way down the coast. And
the name of the game tells you what you can expect.
Yes.
You can't expect a very even battle in 1975. You're just not going to find it. The Americans have left. There's just not much left. The NVA have gained a lot more power, more tanks, more area,
a lot of stuff.
And it's an attritional whittling down for both sides, really.
Yes.
And it's who is standing at the very end. That's ultimately what it is.
And there's a lot for the South Vietnamese player to do, and they can hang on. In the game we just played, South Vietnamese player won. They had literally one piece on the board, but they won.
And it came down to the very final desertion roll.
Yes.
Literally.
And we were 1 pip away on that desertion roll from it going the other way.
I had 3 pieces on the board, literally, out of probably 40 that I started with. And I had to roll a 2 or a less on a D6, and I rolled a 2.
Yeah.
And lost 2 guys, they deserted, and I had 1 lone ARVN unit, reduced ARVN unit, standing alone in Saigon, surrounded by about 8 or 10.
And that was it, right? It was, you did better than historical, you win the game, right?
Yep.
So, but just understand that, but the game in the rules are like, hey, you're supposed to play this twice and just change sides.
Yeah.
It's a 2-hour game session, 2.5-hour game session, and then, it's you determine your victory based on the aggregate of those two games.
Sure.
So that way you both get a chance to like be super aggressive or to like try to do a good defense, that kind of a stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what they say in the rules, what they intend. If you play it as just one session, just know that going into it, right? One of you is an aggressor and has to be very aggressive, and the other player has to defend.
You have to pick and choose. You
Very,
really have to pick
very
and choose.
tactfully, yeah.
And I always like that. I do enjoy that concept of trying to, find a favorable odds area and exploit that. And there's a lot of that here. There's a lot of very interesting choices, though, too.
A significant amount.
The NVA power is incredible. They have a lot of units, a lot of powerful units, a lot of units they bring on the board, lots of activations. And ultimately, they've got to spread themselves out enough to get control of provinces so that attrition or desertion starts coming in.
Yeah.
That's really the way you're going to beat the Arvin.
Because that desertion almost adds as like an extra combat phase. Like you just lose guys.
The first desertion roll I actually have, I think, was in round 3. I rolled a 6. That means I lost six units. And that's devastating. I think the next time I lost 5.
Yep.
Then I lost like 3, maybe 2, and then 2. So I very easily could have lost that game in round 5 or 6 by rolling another 5 or a 6.
Well, and you were a couple, as the South Vietnamese player loses provinces more and more and more, that roll gets worse and worse and worse. And you did a good job.
Yeah, there's a table here.
Take a couple back to get me on a lower column, and that's a lot of what this game is doing those counterattacks in a timely fashion to avoid it being even worse.
Well, and as the SV player, you do have specialized units. You have paratroopers, you have marine units, you have
you got rangers, and the riverboat units.
The riverboat. So you've got to utilize their abilities. Like I would drop in the paratroopers out here in the middle of nowhere and take back an area. And that kept that desertion roll at a manageable level. And I had to keep doing that. Ultimately, if I hadn't done that, I would have totally lost.
Yeah, the special units in this one, mostly that contributes to they have different movement capabilities. Right. Which is a really nice thing because it's like,
yep.
You have a bit more flexibility. The NVA player doesn't have that same flexibility. Their flexibility is the initial, where do they come on out of the Ho Chi Minh Trail? Kind of once they're on the board, though, it's like, they're walking, right?
Yeah.
We walk in, it's slow.
Well, they only move one area at a time. And we talked about this early on. There's a lot of really tough choices for the NVA. You also have limited units.
Yeah.
And if you're taking attritional losses through combat, the Arvin dice really suck, though, by the way.
They do.
They have 1 hit, 2 retreats, and then 3 blanks. So on a 6-sided die, they're not going to do anything half the time. The Arvin or the NVA dice, I think, have 2 hits.
They got 2 hits,
2 retreats. 2 retreats. So if the Arvin can do some losses, which I think I did to you, that hurts because all of a sudden you don't have as many guys.
Yeah.
You can't move them around. You may have had 7 or 8 activations near the last 2 or 3 turns of the game, but you didn't have enough guys.
Nope, I didn't have enough guys on the board. And then there's also the aspect that we talked about of like geography. Yeah. I had a bunch of guys on the board, but they were tied up way in the north where they can't affect the key battle in Saigon.
Yep.
And it's just so slow to move guys on the board to do that in any meaningful way. Or it's like you moving them off the board and then back on. But the game is so short from a turn standpoint that even doing that, you're 3 turns away from that. So there's tough choices of how much do you commit where and when you do that. And I had my first 2 activation rolls were really bad, so it was like, cool, I could bring on like 4 or 5 guys. Yep. Which compared to like 7 or 8 guys would have been a significant difference. So there's always these elements of chance in a game like this. Right? It's a light game. It's not supposed to be the deepest and most crunchiest of games. But I think what it sets out to do, it does well.
Yeah, and I also like a lot of the extra elements they give, like the Arvin. You have some air markers, right? So you can use those to either move troops around, and that's very key at certain times. There were a couple times I used them. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go take this area back. But then you also can use those in combat because they add a dice.
Give you the extra die.
They give you an extra die. You can only ever roll 5 dice. So if you have 5 troops, you don't need to bring in a jet. So you got to use those wisely as well, because they go away through attrition. You're going to roll an attrition die, and guess what? I think
it's 2/3 chance they go away.
Right. And it's just like every time I lost, not every time, but more often than not, I was losing my planes after using them. So you got to manage that as well. To me, the best part is the desertion concept, the area control concept, and then the cards. The cards are devastatingly bad for the SV player. I'm not sure they're great for you, but I think you have
they're much better for
cards.
Me, yeah. Like in that they hurt you.
Yes.
It's good for me.
Right, out of the 20 cards, I think, don't you have 12?
12 are good for me.
5 are good for me. And then 3 are like neutral.
I think it's 6 and 2.
6 and 2, okay.
But then, you take 4 of those out randomly.
Right. And in our game, 2 of those 4 were my Arvin cards.
Yes.
And they were good Arvin cards. I'm like, crap. So I like the cards. I like the way they work. You have to play you have to play the event, and then you do your activations. But even in those cards, there's a lot of choice, though. You always have 3 cards in your hand.
Yes.
So you don't have to play. You're ultimately going to have to play every card in your hand, right? By the end of the game, you only have enough. You're going to have to play every card. So it's not like you can hold the really, really bad cards for you and never see them in the game. It's always going to come out.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what I did. I had this airstrikes card for you.
And that came out at the last, though, right?
Because I was holding on to it, hoping I could win in turn 7 so that I wouldn't have to play it.
Yep.
And then I had to play it, and
I rolled some dice. Yeah.
Had I not had to play that, it might have been a different outcome in the game.
Yep.
And so it's interesting and tough choices. There's also kind of like an experienced little variation of the game where you divvy the cards out and you basically just like have a hand of 8 cards.
Yeah.
So you do have much more choice in that way
right.
of when and if you do those things. But they say for your first game, just have this little hand of 3 and you play one and draw one, play one and draw one. So they've got little nuances. There's a little solitaire mode in here as well. I don't exactly know how that would work with the card play, but
sure, might be interesting to look at.
Yeah, but they've got enough in here where I think this will be suitable for you could solo this, right? They've got little rules for it, but I think it's really good at a 2-player level, right? These kind of little take an hour. This short little session, and it's a tight little game. You can either do that, or you do the switch sides and play again, and you've got a bit more of a beefy gaming session going on.
Sure.
What I will do is I will show you how this works, and then we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the map. Again, pretty small format map, just a few spaces divided up in South Vietnam. There's all this kind of like dark red-brown area that represents North Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and this is mostly just like a holding area for NVA units, or North Vietnam units, as they're called in this game. You sit opposite sides of the table, so you'll see the SV players stuff, the South Vietnamese players stuff is facing this way, North Vietnamese stuff is facing this way from like a little play aid kind of standpoint. Couple holding boxes for South Vietnamese air support units, which are good, but very fragile, and a little turn track over here. So most of the game is divided up into these kind of turns. You're going to have a hand of 3 cards if you're playing kind of the basic game, and you have a hand of these 3 cards, and the cards are either kind of this reddish-brown, which means they're North Vietnamese aligned. They're going to be these yellow ones, which are South Vietnamese aligned. There's a couple green ones, potentially, that are a bit more neutral, that affect both players. You're going to have a hand of 3, and you're going to play 1. And the deck is only 16 cards. There's 20 cards in the game. 4 of them aren't used per game. That's randomly removed. And so you're going to play, each of you, 8 cards, 1 each per turn. There's only 8 turns. So you will play through every card in this game, but it is not many. But it's also one of those things where when you stare at your hand and you've got some opposing events in them, that doesn't feel good, because those are going to trigger, basically. And you have to waste your turn playing those. But a turn consists of, you're going to roll on your particular chart to see how many guys you're going to activate. And it's a D6, and based on what turn it is, It's a d6 plus either 4, 3, or 2 based on where we are on a turn track that corresponds to these colors. For the South Vietnamese player, they're going to start by activating a lot, and then it goes from a d6 plus 4 down to a d6 plus 3 down to a d6 plus 2 at the end. The North Vietnamese player, that is inverse. So it's a d6 plus 2, a d6 plus 3, and a d6 plus 4 in the final turn. And so their strength kind of grows as they're able to activate more guys as it goes on. But you're going to roll, see how many guys you can activate. Then you're going to play your event card, and your event card is like, hey, this bad thing happens, or hey, there's a limited offensive, so actually you don't get to activate nearly as many guys. You're going to play one of those, you're going to draw a replacement card, and then you're going to choose which of your guys are going to activate, and you're going to move with them, and you're going to do combats with them. So the ones with the stars are the face-up ones, they're activated, so we'll just kind of flip them all over so we can get a better picture of this. And there's all sorts of different colors of units on the board. The red are North Vietnamese kind of regulars, NVA. The black ones, those are VC, Viet Cong guerrillas. The yellow are ARVN regulars, the orange are ARVN rangers, the green are ARVN paratroops. There are gray ARVN mech units, there's blue ARVN marine units, and there's also, there's these riverine units as well. These kind of like brown, they just potter around in the Mekong Delta though, they can't really do a whole lot else. But those guys are just there they have different movement effects basically in what they can do. But basically, I'm going to activate a certain number of units. Let's say I'm the NVA. I'm going to roll 2. It's early game. I'm going to roll 2 plus 2. So I can activate 4 guys plus 2, any 2 Viet Cong black Octagon units as well. Now, at the beginning of the game, you have a whole bunch of guys in here that are trying to infiltrate out, but you don't have a lot of this other stuff here. And so you can see these red arrow connections. They're going to kind of spread out from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then they're going to invade out into South Vietnam. Later in the game, when all the units are kind of on the board or have been reduced, it's a bit more of picking guys on the board to move and activate. But let's say we got a couple guys here. I'm going to activate some dudes. Let's flip them all over, and we're going to flip over a little black Viet Cong unit here as well. And then we're going to move, not all of them, but we're just going to say, we're going to move them in. We're going to move 4 guys in. And once we've done all of our moves, we're then going to declare all of our combats. Combat's always optional. So we're going to do a combat here, and then just to show you how it works. So to resolve a combat, you're going to roll 1 die of your color for each unit that you have. Now the Viet Cong dice have 1 hit, 2 hits, and they have 2 retreats. The NVA dice are really good. The South Vietnamese dice have 1 hit, and they have 2 retreats, so they are significantly less good. However, they have these air support. Instead of, when you have a bunch of activations, you can buy air units with those instead of activating units. And they can commit these in attack or defense to get these extra white die, which have 4 hits on them. They're really, really good, but it's likely that these are one-time use things. So the attacker has to commit guys first that say, hey, we're going to commit here. I've got 4 units. I'm not going to commit anything else. You can optionally commit these infiltration markers if you're doing an attack that has units originating from off-map into this area, but we don't. So we're going to attack with these 4 guys against these 2 guys. After the attacker's declared any bonuses, the defender, in this case the ARVN, they're going to say, okay, we're going to put in an air unit. We're actually going to put in another one. You can put a maximum of 2. That's a very expensive commitment, but we really want to defeat these guys, because if we get killed, this is a huge threat on Saigon. If you take Saigon, you win the game. So we're going to commit some strong forces here to defend this. So what does this look like? I have 4 NV units. We're going to roll 4 dice, and the dice are all rolled simultaneously. So we're going to roll our bones here. And we rolled 2 retreats and 2 blanks. Not very good. Now, the South Vietnamese player is going to roll 2 yellow dice because they got 2 units, and then 2 of these white dice because they have 2 air units. So we're going to roll here. Wow, these rolls are pathetic. This is embarrassing rolling, so apologies for everyone watching. So, retreats are an interesting one in this because the net difference is who and how many have to retreat. So, we inflict 2 and you inflict 1, which means these cancel each other out, and we only inflict 1 retreat on the South Vietnamese player. So they're going to choose one of these guys to retreat. Let's say they just choose this guy. Great. These are both misses, and nothing happens to the North Vietnamese troops. However, we have to roll air attrition. So for each air unit that's used, you're going to roll. If you roll a hit, they're gone. So of course we now roll a hit. So he's gone out of the game forever. This guy goes back to base and can be used again next time. Let's see. Could we have made that a bit more interesting? Let's see if we can get a better result on the dice here. Hey, it's a bit better. Not much. Holy crap. That's all misses from the South Vietnamese there. But here we've got 2 hits, so we would kill 2 units, right? You just kill them outright. If you've got these larger full strength units, you can reduce it and then lose a different one if you wanted to be picky about it, but everyone would die in that instance. Wow, these dice are cursed. But basically, you're going to roll these dice over and over again in different combats, and the really interesting part of this game is, yeah, you're trying to put out these NVA control markers. Those are both defensive units, but also they affect the desertion table that the South Vietnamese player is going to roll on. But also, you're trying to defeat guys because the ultimate goal is either to remove all the South Vietnamese pieces from the board, you can win that way, or by taking Saigon. If you can control Saigon at the end of a turn, you win. If neither of those are true, the South Vietnamese player wins at the end of 8 turns. So the interesting part of this is the desertion roll. So at this point, we're going to now roll for desertion. Desertion happens after the South Vietnamese player does all their activations and all their combats and does all their stuff. So to try to reclaim some of these spaces, but as they lose more of this geography, more people desert the army because they know that the end is nigh. But effectively, after all the counterattacking and anything that might get done, they're going to roll on this desertion table. So we count the stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we're going to roll on this column, we're going to roll a d6 plus 3, and that's how many units are just going to leave. They're just going to be done. Again, this is the total collapse of the country, think of it that way. So we're going to roll 3 plus 3 is 6, so we've got 6 units that have to come off the board. And we start with units that are adjacent to the border of Laos and Cambodia, and that share a space with NV units. So these full strength are 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those guys are just gone. They're just done. Your force is just melting away. And then we go to units that share a space with NV units that aren't adjacent to the border. And then we go to basically like any other units. So then we're just going to remove this guy. So that's all of those to satisfy that. So early game, you don't do a lot of desertion. But as the game progresses and more territory gets lost, the desertion really spirals, because then you lose more guys, you're going to then lose more territory, and you're going to lose more guys. And it's this tidal wave that happens towards the end of the game. Things can go very badly very quickly. However, in the game that we just played, I lost as the North Vietnamese and there was 1 unit left on the board, and it was in Saigon. So it was guys hanging on to the bitter end just to beat the historical outcome, right? But that's how the game works. What we'll do is we'll wrap up here with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the map.
Beautiful game.
Yes, excellent production value, which is becoming a hallmark of Nuts Publishing.
Yeah,
I might add. And this, the board is bilingual.
Yes, it is.
The rules in the playbook are not neither of the cards. So this is an English version of the game, but the board is both French and English. Yeah, it has both
French and English.
But all the pieces are just wooden pieces. They look great. This is a fun game to play around, and like, it's very tactile. And it's
and I think one of the things I enjoyed the most about it, even back when, and I think when we first played it, it just had colored cubes. I don't think they were cylinders. I think they were just colored cubes.
I don't know.
It's 5 years ago, right? We need to watch that video. But to me, there was that thematic element. Your communist forces, you had these little red stars. Really liked that for control. Those showed control, but they also provided
a defensive
value. I just thought there were a lot of really unique, and they represented militia.
Yes.
So they represented the communists, the North Vietnamese, taking over a province, kind of establishing the puppet government, and rallying the people to defend, their rights.
Installing the yes.
So I liked that. I also liked how the VC worked. You kind of every round got 2 new VC units or 2 activations of VC units.
Yeah, on top of your NVA units.
And they just added to your firepower. They didn't necessarily do anything specific, but I like how they can't be attacked unless you have either the riverboat units or the Rangers.
Yes.
Without those, those VC kind of sit out there and they control provinces.
Yeah, and they can just kind of run away.
Yeah. To me, there was a lot of that thematic element. I also liked the ARVN had been trained by the U.S. and given some of those assets like jets and the capability to do some naval moves, and they have those elements. So this felt like Vietnam. It felt like the struggle. I loved the tension. I felt desperation.
Yes.
I felt hair pulling. I wanted to throw the dice across the room because I couldn't roll well, but then I felt exultant when, finally I rolled 3 hits and you only rolled 1 and I had to, and when you ultimately, any game that comes down to the final die roll.
It came down to 1 pip on the final
That's amazing.
die, right? That's really cool.
That's good.
That was good fun.
To me, that shows that the game was vetted. And that's what I think the biggest change was from when we played it. They added some little elements that I think...
Yeah, they just tightened it up.
And I think gave the ARVN a slightly more possible chance. Because when we played before, I think I got absolutely crushed.
Yes.
And I didn't feel like it was even close. And I remember my comments, even in the video, was, you got to understand, you're not going to win. But here I won.
This one, we saw it. Is by the skin of its teeth.
Yep, but it's not going to happen every time.
But we also saw that it is entirely possible.
Yes.
Like, there was a lot of things that could have been done differently that could have changed it, the outcome one way or the other.
I just had better die rolling than actually I thought I was going to. I looked at the number of units that I had destroyed of yours, and I'm like, damn, I actually killed a lot of units.
Yes.
And that's ultimately what ended up happening. You didn't have enough units to do what you needed to do.
Yes.
And you had too many units in the north.
Yeah,
that's probably the only.
And it's where they were located and that.
Yeah. Had you maybe attacked here, but you had like 4 or 5 units in the north. Good job, you took over Hue, but
I didn't have enough activations to get them
back
to the
down.
south.
Yep, it's very true
because the activations are a die roll, and so again, it's a game, right?
Yep.
It plays in an hour. It gives you some great tension and some really interesting choices to make and some fun dice rolling. But it does that all in an hour, which is really, really neat.
Oh, yeah.
And again, I have learned a significant amount about this game from playing it, so that the next time we play it will be very different.
Oh, totally.
Even from the ARVN have a lot of free setup with their special units.
I put too many units in the north. I probably should have kept more in the south.
But that's the kind of stuff that you're going to figure out the nuance of the more you play this game.
Yep.
The more you play it, the better you can get at it. And if you play it with a regular opponent, it's going to become one of those games that you're just going to whip out all the time.
Yep.
It's going to be really this enjoyable little tense thing. And it's going to, I think it has staying power as that. Because
it plays in an hour.
Yes. Yes.
If this played in 2.5 hours, I'm not sure it would be worth it.
Yeah, getting punched in the face for that long isn't as enjoyable.
But 45 minutes to an hour...
And you have a significant amount of choices as the South Vietnamese player before the attrition sets in.
Right. And I'm telling you, that desertion is brutal.
You roll bad on the desertion, and it's just like everything just melts away. Well, and that is a holdover from the previous.
It is, and it's such an interesting chart too. I'm trying to figure out where it is. It's over here. It's covered up. If you control 1 to 4 provinces, nothing happens. Nobody's frightened. Nobody's really worried.
And it's going to take me at least 2 or 3 times to get that.
At least 2, possibly 3 to get that. I think I made a couple mistakes early on. I probably should have defended wherever it was that I just left open.
There was nothing there, yeah.
And they didn't start me anything there, and I thought, maybe I should have put 1 or 2 units there. But when you get 5 to 9, you're going to start deserting. You're going to roll a d6. It's a straight d6.
Yeah.
You can roll a 1. I rolled a 6 and a 5. That can hurt. That hurts badly.
That's pretty much max.
Yeah. But then, 10 to 14, you start to add a d6 plus 3.
And it's like, you only get to that point if you've already lost a lot of guys anyway.
Yeah.
And then you're going to lose more.
even more.
It's
snowballs.
that snowball right at the end, and then it's this key battle for Saigon with whoever the hell's left.
Yep.
And it's, did you hang on long enough?
Yeah.
Well, it's a great feeling. There is a very defined story in this game.
No, definitely. There's a great narrative.
That.
Yep. And it's about key choices. Okay, I'm going to go take that area and that area just to get him under the next level, so I'm only rolling a d6.
Yeah.
How many times did I do that?
Yes,
I used
at
my
least twice.
Paratroopers, and that's what you got to do. The Marines have a C move. You got to use those assets. And when they start deserting, man, you don't have anything left.
Because
good luck.
The difference between a D6 and a D6 plus 3.
Oh, it's a huge difference.
I mean,
so I actually really enjoyed it. I had a good time with it. I like that it's light. I like that it's somewhat varied, particularly the fact that you're not going to see every card every game. A lot of it's dependent on dice roll. If the dice rolling goes really poorly for you, you're probably not going to last long. But that's what the fun is, trying to survive. How am I going to make it?
Yes.
So, anyway.
So yeah, Saigon 75 from Nuts Publishing. If there's something that you think would be interesting, check it out. But also, I'm going to go back and watch that video.
Me too, and I should have watched it
for a little piece of history. But I'm glad that this finally is kind of seeing the production light of day and that people can get their hands on it if they want to. It feels a really nice kind of space. I really have it's a place in my heart and in my collection for these kind of hour or less games that have some beef and meat to them, but also you can squeeze them in places.
Yeah.
This is, you can take this. This is a fairly small box.
It's like a 2-inch box.
Doesn't take up a lot of space on the table. Nope. It's the kind of thing that you can very easily take with you somewhere, or you can just whip it out on a lunch break. That's the kind of stuff that these are really nice for that.
Anybody can learn this too. It's not overly complex.
No.
But there's enough uniqueness that it's interesting. So one final comment. Pascal Tupi is one of the designers. Jean-Philippe Barcus is the other designer. I don't know which was the lead, but Pascal did those 2 games in C3I, Firebase Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
And Teutoburg, Roman Disaster at Teutoburg.
Yes.
And those were both solitaire games, kind of dice rolling, dice placement, right? Weren't they?
It was mostly just dice chucking and like an action assignment with your dice.
So he did both those games. Those were kind of his introduction. Now this is a kind of a bigger game. I think he's probably worked on all those at the same time. Now he's doing one for GMT called Napoleon in Egypt. It's on P500, came out 2 or 3 months ago. Looks really interesting. So Napoleonic game. But Pascal is one of those guys that I think is coming in into his own and starting to put together some interesting games. I look for more of these kind of things from him.
Yes.
And the art's beautiful. I mean,
that's true.
That cover hasn't changed since the day it was shown.
And this is iconic from...
Oh, it's great.
This is the thing I remember from the first
game,
right?
Yep.
Yes. So yeah, Nuts Publishing, Saigon 75. Check this out if this is something that you're interested in, but appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.